to the Immigration Podcast. My name is Rob Ratliff. I'm an immigration attorney in Cleveland, Ohio, and a former immigration judge. And with us tonight is our co-host. Go ahead.
Susan Hiller, Hiller Law Group. Great to see you.
Good to see you, Susan. So we were just talking before we hit the record button that a terrible injustice to a military family.
Yeah, I have a client that I'm kind of bewildered because he just sent me, and the hearing is next week, and he just got denied military parole in place because he 20 years ago entered the United States. And what a lot of people did 20 years ago was they would enter and they would be given voluntary return. So they would turn around and in the government, we call that kind of like a turnstile.
Yeah.
So if you picture a turnstile where you're going through a revolving door, same thing. So they would be sent back to Mexico, kind of regardless of where they came from almost. But he was from Mexico, turned around, and then they usually would come back with the help of a coyote like a day or two later. So my client did that. It was very normal. And I can say that as a government attorney because I heard that story for the last 26 years. And voluntary return was a very nice way for the government to give you a chance to have a clean record. So it wasn't considered a bad thing to give them voluntary return. And now he had voluntary return once or twice, but it was within the span of a week. So what he was doing is he was trying to get into the United States 20 years ago, and he got in finally. The government used that, his very pure honesty and my honesty in the application for military parole in place, to deny him military parole in place. He has, go ahead, yes.
Yeah, well, and to kind of backtrack, just, if somebody doesn't know, military parole in place allows you, if you have a family member serving in the U.S. military, to adjust status based on that family relationship or another family relationship with the U.S. citizen or permanent resident, even if you previously entered the country unlawfully.
Correct.
Without inspection. And so this person had children serving in the military? Is that?
Oh, not only one, but two. So the one child that's serving currently, in fact, I can only tell you so much about him because he had some special roles during this Iran conflict that his father is not even allowed to release, and his father doesn't even know the full extent. So you could surmise potentially Delta Force, Special Forces. I don't know for a fact, but he had special operations during this Iran conflict. Whether you agree with it or not is irrelevant. He's doing what he's told to do, right? So we have to think of it as, even if it were a just war, again, I'm trying not to go into the politics of this particular one, but let's just think of the fact that he's serving our nation, he's serving in a specialized role, and he's doing what he's told to do. And what his father did tell me is that his older son was sent on a special operation that he couldn't disclose the exact operation, and it's recently. And I know he's back now, but there was a certain point during this time, during the Iran conflict, he wasn't around. And the younger son, who's not that much younger, but younger, he has 3 U.S. citizen children, just to let you know. The middle child actually is a disabled veteran, disabled because of serving for our country, also his country, of course, United States citizen. He got disabled from serving for this country and denied. His father has just recently been denied military parole in place by the Charlotte office and placed into removal proceedings so quickly that his master calendar is next week. Right after Memorial Day weekend. And he just got denied. So as his counsel, I'm actually, going to be away, so I'll try to do a motion for continuance. But how quickly this happened is also a huge injustice.
Yeah. Well, what was the basis for denying it? I mean, it's a discretionary form of relief. So, correct. I mean, they don't have to grant it, but I very rarely have ever heard of military parole in place being denied.
Yeah, it's not only have I not heard of it in the government, I've never seen them put the actual parent, the parent of the U.S. citizen children who are serving, actively serving in the military. Again, here we have one out of Fayetteville, North Carolina, for the potentially maybe Special Forces Delta Force, 82nd Airborne. I'm not sure, but it's out of Fayetteville, North Carolina, with some special operations. I do know that actively and honorably still serving this country right now. Um, they put him into removal proceedings. What was the basis, you asked me? Because he entered the country, not only because he was given voluntary return, and he disrespected the immigration laws 20 years ago enough to come back in and got voluntary return. This is 20 years ago.
Yeah. And this isn't a perm bar case. This isn't somebody that came, stayed a long time,
No,
left, and came back.
no.
Yeah.
This person, again, voluntary return, which I know for some of the newer immigration attorneys, for me and you, Rob, it was such commonplace. It was, we had, I guess we could say we had a little bit more of a humanitarian immigration system back then, that they would give them the respect of voluntary return, which was actually more lenient than voluntary departure.
Yeah.
Because voluntary departure, you could have a 3 to 5 year bar, but to return, voluntary return had no bar. And because of that, because they've already paid the coyotes back then, the coyotes would turn around and, it's not always the respondent's fault or the non-immigrant immigrant's fault. They're being turned back in by the coyotes because they paid the coyotes for this service 20 years ago, and the coyotes literally will take them back in again. And eventually they do circumvent the Border Patrol. But my client, and I always make sure, because I tell them the truth will set you free. We told the complete truth about that. It's 20 years ago. And since then, he's had 3 United States citizen children, 2 of them serving for the U.S. government, the military. To me, I don't know how to say this, except to say that this is horrific.
Yeah. But, and, it's different when it's a perm bar case, because perm bar does prevent you from, in a perm bars, you came and you stayed more than 6 months or a year and left and came back. This is a form of relief that is just extremely common.
Yes.
Mm.
His wife got it. Same children. His
Really?
lawful permanent resident wife was granted. So I almost feel like this is a res judicata issue, because if his wife was granted on the same child,
Mm-hmm.
because his older child is not the same, it has a different mother. So he has 2 United States citizen children in the military, but his wife got the lawful permanent residence in the military parole in place granted on the disabled veteran child. So to me, it's really a case of res judicata. How do you turn around and then say, I do understand that there's voluntary return, but she also entered illegally over 20 years ago.
How how long ago was hers granted?
5 years ago. It's not that long ago.
See, so
It
but
might
that
have been even under Trump 1.0. It might not have been a Biden case either.
yeah, yeah, but that clearly demonstrates that the change in the processing and the way they're reviewing cases and things of that nature. We're seeing it in the bond cases now. Now that some circuits are allowing bond hearings, we're seeing a much different standard in what's considered appropriate for bond.
Correct.
You see this, and the things that used to be acceptable or even favorable for bond, length of residence, community ties, family ties, employment, all those sorts of things, are now considered detrimental to
Correct.
your bond application, and that's just been a complete change, and it sounds like that's the same situation there.
And not only that, Rob, you're absolutely correct. But what bothers me as a former, government employee and assistant chief counsel is that I've always admired people who tell the truth, because we should want the truth, right? And those are the people we should want to stay here, not the ones who fooled the system. So with my clients, I always make sure, I always tell them the truth will set you free. And we're telling the truth, and instead we're actually being these individuals who are telling the truth and have, you know, they have these honorable children serving for the US government, and these individuals are being put into removal proceedings. They're not just being denied the military parole in place, which I think is, really horrific for just entering the country legally. That's what this was made for. It's a waiver for that. But they're actually being punished at the same time that their children are in either top secret or whatnot positions in the U.S. government, defending this country and the people of this country, whether
Yeah,
it's from an invasion or from a war that we might not agree with, but they're doing what they're told.
well, and that's a bargain that the government made with these families.
Correct.
It didn't used to be, and you remember when. I mean, it didn't used to be that entering unlawfully prevented you from adjusting status. And
Mm-hmm.
if you had U.S. citizen children, or if you had a U.S. citizen spouse or parents or whatever, you could adjust status even if you had a prior unlawful entry. When they changed that, part of that change brought forth some of these programs, and it's a bargain that the government has made with these families and these kids like this, that I can help my parent if by
Correct.
doing this, and to rescind that is very detrimental to the families.
It's not only you're absolutely correct. It's so detrimental to the families. But if you think about it, I know my clients will be outstanding no matter what, working for the U.S. government and the U.S. military. But think of like some other people's kids that might make them very disgruntled. And you now have this whole group of class of U.S. citizens. Their parents are trying to adjust their status, and this administration is rushing to try to deport their parents. The most important people in your life are your children and your parents generally. So do you really want a group of military personnel that are that disgruntled serving you? I don't understand the administration's.
Well,
I don't understand. It's not good for the American people. It's not good for the administration.
and a whole group of first generation Americans that feel a duty or an obligation or a desire to serve, and are being told that it doesn't matter.
Right.
It's not going to help your family. That's that's a that's not gonna it's not gonna go well long term
No.
for recruitment, and for helping those kids and those families adopt and adapt to American life.
I don't understand how they would ever. I don't know how you could have loyalty to a country that has no loyalty to you.
Puts those families in a very, very difficult position. I
And not
think.
all of these. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Rob. Go ahead.
No, no, go ahead.
Not all of these children went into it. I don't know what this administration is thinking, but not all these children went into it just to help their parents. They went into it out of a profound love for this country and the ideals of this country.
And I've got a young man who's facing removal now, and he's he's still detained, even though he was granted voluntary departure about 6 weeks ago. They still haven't allowed him to leave. But I mean, one of the things he expressed early on was like, he wanted to join the military. His whole goal growing up was he wanted to join the military, but he didn't have legal status. He was brought here as a baby,
Mhm.
uh, and so that wasn't even an option for him. And now he's the only country he's known, but he's facing removal to a place he's never been, a language he barely speaks, and so it's definitely a bad situation, and I don't know how that gets resolved long term. We're seeing so many changes so quickly that it is very difficult to keep up and
Mhm.
to properly advise clients. In that situation, I agree with you. You certainly can never tell a client to lie, and but what was the lesson for the client that was honest there?
Mhm.
Because the government doesn't have records of that, very rarely.
Right.
But that you have to tell the clients to tell the truth, and the clients have to tell the truth because you never know. As I always tell them, I said you never know what they know, and you
Right.
have to you have to tell the truth, and you cannot not tell the truth,
Yep.
and then they get punished for doing so. And it's not like he disclosed something, like he was a terrorist or a drug dealer or
Mhm.
a wanton criminal. He crossed the border a couple times.
Same thing with my client. Exactly.
Yeah,
Crossed the border a couple times within the span of 1 week, 20 years ago. And after that, he he has a lawful permanent resident wife. He raised three amazing United States citizen children, two of which served honorably for this country. One which is actively serving in a, again, I don't know for a fact, but obviously some type of special operations division. Um, why? Why would you do this to the father? Like, I,
well,
I,
and it's
I don't understand.
yeah, and the change in the law with respect to the adjustment status for illegal entry, and it used to be so common. I've had to counsel people over the years that now have perm bars, which means you can't adjust status. You
Right.
basically not eligible for anything, and that's because they have multiple entries. But before the change in the law, it was so common that in transit across the border was so easy and welcomed that people would be here without status working and would go home for Christmas,
Yep.
and just come back. Or there's even programs in Mexico for people that that used to go home for Christmas to make sure they got to the right place and help from the Mexican government. And and those people all now have perm bars that they can't fix and they can't correct.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is like when I travel out to California, I'm reminded by the people of California how, and I don't think the American people have been educated on this because it's not politically welcome, but there was a treaty that we signed, the United States government, that there were certain portions of um, Texas and California that were supposed to go back to Mexico. So that didn't happen. So if you think about it, at least in the sense of like 20 years ago, the coming back and forth of people, I think one of the reasons also that it was just so accepted is we knew they were originally, a lot of them were originally here, their
Yeah,
families,
yeah. The border moved, not necessarily the
right?
people,
Right.
and it's one of the things that I always kind of found fascinating in the immigration context with some of those historical changes. And back in the 50s, there was the actual government program called Operation Wetback, and yeah, you never.
That was called
Oh,
Operation Wetback.
yeah, Operation Wetback, and it was in the like it was like 1954 ish, and they decided that there were people of Mexican or Hispanic descent living in the Southwest that would be much happier living south of the border. So they
Mhm.
just scooped them
Right.
up. And, many of
Yeah.
those people should have been citizens, probably were citizens. Um, it's been so many years now that probably very few are still alive, but it's, their descendants probably should qualify for U.S. citizenship.
Right.
And, but there were lots and lots of people that were just scooped up and sent back. And, that, it goes to uh, the nation of immigrants thing. And it was never really that. It was always kind of a nation of European immigrants. And, we would tolerate, few people here and there to work for us. You know, the Chinese Exclusion Act and the quota systems and things like that.
Right.
But yeah, it's very, very interesting, the real history of immigration. It's not, you know, just,
Right.
it's not all just Ellis Island and welcome and here's how to changing your name so we can spell it better.
Correct.
Yeah. So
I did a whole history of it for ICE actually, which I kind of knew already, but I did that, and it was very eye opening to see all the Asian exclusion acts that were passed.
mhm. Yeah,
Um,
and the quota systems
yeah.
and all those sorts of things. It it's it's very difficult. I think one of the things, you know, one of the things that our firm offers, and one of the reasons I'm here, and we have to do so much counseling nowadays with people is basically repatriation. You know, the families that have been here decades, you know, with assets and businesses and extended families. Now they're facing situations where th- they're living in constant fear for either themselves or another family member. They uh, are looking for their pathways to divest, um, to get their assets in order so that they can leave the United States, and that's going to have a ripple effect on the economy because there's so many of the small businesses, and
Mhm.
I hear from employers every day about there's no workers, nobody in construction trades, and it's finally a little bit like spring in northern Ohio, and you know companies are desperate for people to help and work, and they're just not there. And even a lot of the minority and immigrant owned businesses are are shutting down because they can't they can't take the risk
That's
anymore.
happening in Ohio.
Yeah, it's happening everywhere, and we're seeing people on a daily basis that um, you know talking about how they're going to be able to sell their house, or how they're going to be able to
Yeah.
uh, get their savings out of the United States, and uh, and it's difficult conversations to have because people have been in the United States for their entire lives. Many of them whom have paid into Social Security for decades, but they're not going to see that back. Um, so those are difficult conversations to have
Yeah.
because there's not a pathway to fix your status for many people.
That's millions and millions of dollars leaving our economy.
Yeah, yeah, it really is, and the ripple effect of it, that cost. You think houses are expensive now. How
Mhm.
much more are they going to be when there's no framers, there's no roofers, there's no uh, plumbers, electricians. We have just the few that have some sort of legal status, and we can't get enough work done.
Speaking of that, Rob, so I have clients that once they get their status, they want to go to trade schools, and I don't know if this is happening there, but they won't allow them to go to the technical schools here in South Carolina, North Carolina without a social security number, which
Yeah,
kind of amazes me because you want to be an electrician and you're willing to pay the full sum of that technical school. And we need the electricians. I understand they need the work authorization, but we're just talking about schooling.
hmm
Like, is that also in Ohio where you actually need a social security number to go to school, a trade school?
I I hesitate to answer because I have not seen that with respect to schools in Ohio. The thing that we really struggle with is the driver's license situation,
Mm.
and access to that, and even people that have valid work authorizations and valid status. Just I talked to somebody today who uh, here on a valid temporary visa, has temporary employment authorization, uh, had his foreign driver's license because he's not here forever, he's just here temporarily. And they still prosecuted him for driving without a license. And,
Right.
went through the process, paid the fine and things. But uh, I mean, no, you're here temporarily. The foreign license is okay temporarily.
I can't imagine as an American being over in Europe or some other place. You have an American license and being charged criminally there for driving without a license. Just to make you a criminal so they can remove you so you can never come back, or they can take your money from your bank account, steal your assets, is the way I look at it. Because they're your assets. I mean,
Yeah, yeah. And I haven't seen much enforcement of it. But I don't know. You can recall when in the early days of the second Trump administration, so many people got the letters with you owe 1 million, 2 million in fines because you haven't self-deported. I haven't seen them collecting that much, but many people who do get those letters and do have assets are very worried about it, and I think reasonably so. But you know they've went from demanding all these exorbitant fines and costs for people to now, routinely, I think every time you get in court, you have the self-deport notice now. Are
yep.
you getting those? That explains to you, well, if you just go ahead and leave, we'll give you a couple $1,000. Eh,
They send that to me, Rob, too. It's like,
yeah,
I'm like, they have another hearing. You haven't even gone through their application for relief, which Congress passed these applications for relief. They haven't even had their due process yet, and you're telling them to self-deport. It's saying that you're not going to actually adjudicate their application fairly. But on a side note, I do like that new board case for the second and third prong. I don't know if you looked at that board case that actually said that the immigration judge has to be fair to both sides.
yeah, yeah. It just came out like 2 days ago, and it was an interesting with all the BIA decisions in the last few months that they're coming out fast and furious, but they're very short. They're very short on legal reasoning. They're more statements than they are, legal
Yes.
reasoning. But that was interesting, and I'd like to see what the transcripts were that made the board actually say that.
But you know what
Uh,
I like, Rob,
what was
is at
that?
the same time this is going on, I have a habeas lawsuit in the Folkston County area.
Okay.
I think that's Waycross Division of the Federal District Court of Georgia, the Waycross Division.
Hmm.
There was a particular judge that actually wouldn't let me present witnesses or evidence. It's on the transcript. And
In a
so,
habeas.
oh yeah, and so we went back to the district court with the help of one of the immigration coalitions that is helping out, and basically, you know, stated the judge was completely denied due process. And exactly what that board case addressed, at least, I'm not talking about the actual, what the reasoning was behind it, but the actual law that came out. You need to be fair, and you also need to state things correctly that are stated off the record. And that's actually what happened in my immigration bond case. Is the bond record was not. I stated things when we got back on the bond record that were not stated by the judge, and I tried to correct that record. She wouldn't allow me to correct the record.
Hmm.
And then she also stated that the respondent was convicted of a crime he actually was not convicted of, and it literally put that in her decision. He was convicted of a domestic violence crime when it was actually dismissed because it was found not credible by the prosecutor. So very different, night and day. And the judge actually stated something was not just a misrepresentation. She wouldn't allow me actually to even present the evidence that I put up in my hand right in front of the screen, showing her it was dismissed by the prosecution. she would not take that, and she actually stated to me, are you saying that the Department of Homeland Security is lying? I didn't want to say they're lying because actually the department didn't say they were convicted.
Right.
But what I asked the judge is, please ask the department if they were convicted, because they were not convicted and they should have it in their file. I know this is a former assistant chief counsel.
Yeah.
They have to run the criminal history. It's in there as a background check. They're in detention as well. An additional background check is run because they're in detention. So that particular case reminded me almost as if they knew about this, what some of these judges were doing. It wasn't my case, but it seemed like they knew what some of these judges were doing, almost like a, be careful because you're going to make us look stupid. And they, so.
Well, and that's an interesting thing, as the judge in the courtroom, you have a weird control that doesn't exist in any other courtroom, in that you control the record.
You do.
And you control when the tape is recording. There's no court reporters in immigration court. There's no there's only the recording. In the old days, it used to be a cassette tape, and they would flip it over
Yep.
in the middle of the hearings. But now it's all digital, and I mean, there's a couple of issues with it. The system, I think, works really well, but a couple of issues with it. One is you're clicking it on and off in between.
I have a question on that, Rob.
Yeah.
Because when I used to be back in the day, I could see and hear when they clicked the recording off of a tape recorder. I can't see when the judge clicks off the digital recording. Can you tell me, as a former immigration judge, like, how did you do that? Was it something I could see?
No, it's literally a button on the screen, and you just, your mouse rolls over it. You pick your case, and it comes up, and then you just hit call it DAR, digital audio recorder, and you just click record. And there's some eccentricities with that system, but you're supposed to be turning it on and off in between every case. So if you've got multiple master calendars, you may just be running them all on one big long recording. But you're controlling when that record starts, when it starts recording. If it gets turned off in the middle, that may be your finger on the button. If it, I had a long time ago, I was trying to preserve an issue on the record, and clearly the circuit court had ruled against me, but there was a split, and I was just trying to preserve it on the record, and the judge was yelling at me repeatedly. But it was that situation where, click, turn it off, yell at me for a little while, click, turn it back on. Judge, when we were off the record, I tried to, click, turn it off,
So you had an idea they were turning it off, so you knew, right?
Yeah, I knew, yeah. Well, it was an aggressive turning it off at that point. But, yeah, no, you wouldn't necessarily know. And just like many of the things that the judges do, I think the system works really well. And I know when I first got on the bench, I was shocked at how well it did work. But for marking the evidence, clicking the orders, all that sort of stuff, works very well. It's all in there. But yeah, you control when that recording starts and stops, and and it'll show up when, if there's an appeal and somebody asks for the record, or and now we can, which is a recent phenomena, is the ability to just go in and pull the DAR yourself through the court's website. That's just been the last few months.
Right. And you know what it showed on my case is that she yelled at me. She clicked it off. I couldn't tell, but I can tell you this. I made sure I was trying to say on the record, because you have to create a record. Your Honor, why did you just yell at me? Why did you just yell at me? And so she tried to talk over me, so I couldn't say that. And then, their new thing, or this particular judge, is to call you unprofessional because you're trying to create a record. And I'm like, Your Honor, with all due respect, I'm just trying to create a record. She didn't mark the evidence in the bond hearing. She wouldn't let my client testify. I asked 2 questions. And she said on the third question it was irrelevant, shut the bond hearing tape off, and clicked me off on the recording. But remember, I was granted a habeas petition to have this bond hearing. So this is why we addressed it with the district court, because it was a sham hearing. I wasn't, you know, it would have been one thing if she did a fake hearing and pretended she was listening and pretended she was giving due process. She literally showed she was giving no due process.
And I think, do you think to a certain extent, though, especially with a lot of the newer judges, that they're getting kind of a mixed message? One, we don't know what kind of message they're getting from the administration as to how to do things, but they're also getting rulings and BIA decisions and policies about they can pre-termit a case if there's nothing there.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have to, just ways for them to shortcut to a no. And at the same time, then, like that ruling, there was a recent Fourth Circuit decision that said the judges have a duty to develop the record. So I think, in fairness to some of the newer judges, especially, they are seeing a bit of a mixed message about what really they should be doing, and then they're also seeing mass exodus of people getting fired. So
I
that
would
creates its own apprehensions.
I think that's wonderful, Rob, what you just said, except that this particular person, she worked for the Florida bar. She knows what due process is, and she knows how to actually she knows how to actually give discipline to attorneys who have done things wrong. And she worked for the Florida bar when I looked up her information for so long that there's really no excuse. She's not young. Most of her experience was with the Florida bar, and then I think as a public defender. So to me, looking up her background, no immigration experience going in there. The only one from her entire immigration class that was not fired. All the other probationary attorneys from her class, like George Pappas, all of them were fired. She wasn't. So I look at her more and wonder, how is she maybe doing this politically? Unfortunately, I'd love to say all the other things, because I know a lot of them are under pressure and they could be fired at whim, and they are getting mixed messages. But in this particular case with this particular judge, and again, they're not immigration judges, not to disrespect you, Rob, but I do want to make sure for my ethical purposes, I'm not criticizing a technical judge, because some, the North Carolina Bar Association, you can't say things negative. I don't know why, but you can't say things negative about a judge. They're attorneys. For those of you out there that don't know this, they're general attorneys, although they are doing a very important job, but they're not actually recognized under the Constitution as, judges in that respect. So I'm not criticizing an actual judicial judge in that respect. But
Yeah.
I think in her case, there may be some fear of losing her job, but I do think that she should know better. That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a whole other conversation. What is really the authority and jurisdiction of judges? And I know, having been through the training, they really present it like you are a judge and you should be impartial and have these ensuring due process and all that. But the reality is that position isn't that. You're essentially an extension of the Attorney General, and when you look at what the Attorney General's authority is, it's very broad and very it just covers a wide range of immigration relief and benefits, and many of the laws, constitutional things that go to the Attorney General say that the Attorney General has discretion to make these decisions. So you're really in a position where you're acting as an extension of the Attorney General to exercise the Attorney General's discretions, and so there's not really a neutral arbiter in the courtroom. and whether or not there should be, that's a separate question. But the judges really are just there to exercise the attorney general's discretion. And that's why you have things like BIA opinions that can be rescinded by the attorney general and just reissues like, well, no, I disagree and it should be this. So it's an interesting dynamic, both constitutionally and from a well, due process is constitutional, but
Yeah.
it's an interesting dynamic as to how that those decisions should be made and what the basis for them are. I read I read all the articles and things to make immigration judges more of an independent body, and there's not a place for that within the constitutional framework of immigration to the United States.
Yeah, that's the one thing I do struggle with, like intellectually, is like at the same time I know that immigration is actually in the Constitution. It is within the province of the executive. It's the president's
Mhm.
authority. So, which makes sense when we were originally founded, right? But at the same time, I struggle with that, whether I was working for the government or working privately. I struggle with that because I still want due process. And how do you get due process if immigration is a political football? Because if it is under an attorney general and that attorney general changes with an administration, and the president is political, right? I mean, it's a political position. You vote for that person. They may represent a party. Maybe one day we'll have an independent president, but right now we have a partisan president, and those partisan presidents make decisions. And those attorney generals generally they work for the president. Despite I do think they should be more independent, but it is hard to articulate. I do believe the judges should be independent because I love immigration not to be a political football, but it was put in as a political football into the Constitution.
Well, and you're 100% right though that it was a completely different system when it was designed, and it's been further complicated now because of the significant role. Now we have three separate cabinet level officials. Homeland Security, Department of Justice, State Department, all have a role within the immigration system, and there is no central immigration process. It just goes back and forth. And you look at what some other countries do with respect to immigration, whether it's a need-based system or a local-based system. The immigration needs in Florida or California are vastly different than the immigration needs in Maine or Montana, I think. But we have this one policy for everybody, and I think that creates problems. There's no long-term plan for immigration. There's no, as a country we want to go in one direction or another direction. There's no long-term plan, and it's just this hodgepodge of rules that and the more conflict in Congress between the two parties, the less likely there's ever be some sort of reform or combined policy. So it's there's just no it's rudderless, and it just swings back and forth, and that's what creates so much of the problem. That's what creates this it turns the United States into essentially an attractive nuisance under like in a tort law theory.
Wait,
So,
explain that because I kind of get
well,
it.
like
No.
you have, if you have a pool in your backyard, your insurance company and sometimes even local regulations will require you to put a fence around your pool so that
Oh, right,
the neighbor's toddler doesn't fall in and drown, or that
right.
just you don't have those issues. And that's under tort theory, that's called an attractive nuisance.
True, true,
And
true.
and the for better or for worse, the United States is an attractive nuisance with respect to our employment, the benefits that we give,
Mhm.
why would you not want to come here? You know, if and even
There's
if it's just for a
mixed
few years.
messages too.
Yeah, yeah, and we look the other way for companies. Of all the people that you've seen deported in the last year and a half, all the people that you've seen detained in the last year and a half, how many employers have you seen indicted for hiring those people?
None.
Exactly,
And
exactly,
one thing I did like during the Bush administration, I did work for the government then, but I did like is they went after the employers,
yeah, yeah,
and that's who they should go after.
yeah. It creates a situation where we put out a this buffet of employment and money and benefits, and people are going to come to that. People are desperate or poor or have no other options, and it puts them at risk. The you've talked to, I'm sure, hundreds, as I have. I've heard horrific stories, young women and old women and kids, the abuses they've suffered on the way here, and but people want cheap tomatoes.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard abuses of that. I've never really. Oh gosh, I mean, you and I go back so far, but when I started hearing, how the Chinese would come over and how they had to work off these debts. But today I hear these stories. The debts are so high of $100,000 to $150,000 from very poor countries like India, and they have to come here and and I know they willingly put themselves into it, but they really didn't know the reality of the situation. In my opinion, it might have worked out 20 years ago for some people, and maybe they own a business today, but they put themselves into human trafficking hands. They went through some excruciating circumstances. Some of them walked past bones.
Hmm.
Not all of them did, but some of them talked to me about walking past bones, about being offered cocaine to be able to walk 14 hours because they weren't gonna let their group stop. Some of them talked about being whipped. And then they get here and they have to work. They have to pay that money back to the family members they borrowed it from, or loan sharks. And then they're put into these conditions. Again, they accept them, but again, it's not ideal. And they're transferred from to employer. And by the time they pay off that debt, they're already exploited again in the community by maybe some other type of like exploitation because they can't get into status fast enough to get free.
Hmm.
So they'll be exploited maybe for, and I'm not saying all of them do this, but maybe somebody came up to them and said, listen, I can get you a U visa, blah, blah, blah. Yes, it's legal because this sheriff is doing it. And they get exploited for another 20 grand. And here they are now in another debt bonded situation. Why? Because they were human trafficked. They have a $150,000 debt. They were labor trafficked. They weren't paid adequately. They weren't paid overtime. They're transferred from to employer. And they still can't become legal. They get exploited again. So I think people need to understand some of the situations that the employers put them in and realize that the people that we're seeing removed, or me, are the ones who have made these employers wealthier.
Hmm.
And they were victims. They're victims of being very poor in their countries, and just like you or I, if we were super poor and need to feed our family, and we would want to try to go to another country maybe and try to escape the poverty.
Yeah, and we just created a system that relies on that.
Right.
So yeah,
It relies on that labor, yeah.
yeah. All right. Well, Susan, happy Memorial Day coming up.
Happy Memorial Day, Rob.
Yeah, yeah. And say hello to the family.
Will do.
Yep. And we'll
And
see
you
you
too.
next time.
See you next time, Rob.
All right.
All right.